The Zephyrian hegemony had conquered 17 star systems before breakfast, metaphorically speaking, though breakfast for a Zephyrian involved consuming crystallized photons, which rather put a damper on the whole meal experience. Their latest target, however, promised to be so delightfully uncomplicated that Fleet Commander Vexthul had actually brought along his collection of probability crystals to pass the time during what the tactical computers euphemistically called planetary acquisition procedures. Earth, as the locals quaintly named their little blue marble, sat in their crosshairs like a particularly slow-moving target at a military academy. The surveillance reports made for amusing reading. These humans had barely managed to crawl out of their gravity well without blowing themselves up, a feat that admittedly, many species failed to achieve. They'd constructed some charmingly primitive orbital installations, and had even managed a few tentative steps toward their nearest celestial neighbor. How adorable. The Galactic Threat Assessment Bureau had filed Earth under negligible risk, high entertainment value, right between the gas-huffing philosophers of Kepler-4 U2b and the sentient fungi that composed terrible poetry on Proxima Centauri. The humans rated a solid 2.3 on the Destruction Capability Index, which placed them just above the civilization that had weaponized interpretive dance and slightly below the species that had accidentally conquered 3 worlds through aggressive door-to-door sales tactics. Vexthul's elongated cranium housed a brain roughly 3 times the size of a human's, though he'd never admit that size wasn't everything. After his unfortunate encounter with the quantum butterflies of Rigel Sept, his intelligence briefings painted humans as a species of remarkable inconsistency. They'd simultaneously invented faster-than-light communication and reality television, created beautiful art, while also developing something called social media. The contradiction was almost endearing. Commander, his tactical officer, buzzed through the ship's Neuralink. The preliminary scans are complete. Their defensive capabilities are, well, they're certainly trying their best. The holographic display materialized before Vexthul, showing Earth's military assets in all their quaint glory. Nuclear weapons that could barely crack a moon, fighter craft that moved with the speed and grace of arthritic space whales, and orbital platforms that looked like they'd been assembled by particularly ambitious children with an unlimited supply of metal scraps and questionable engineering degree. How refreshing, Vexthul mused, his tentacles arranging themselves in the Zephyrian equivalent of a smirk. A civilization that still believes in the charming notion that bigger explosions solve complex political problems. Have they attempted any form of diplomatic contact yet? Several times, sir. They've transmitted mathematical proofs, cultural artifacts, and something called memes that our linguistic computers refuse to process. Apparently, the concept of humor that relies on shared cultural ignorance breaks their cognitive matrix. The fleet stretched across space like a metallic constellation, each vessel a testament to the hegemony's technological superiority. Their weapons could glass planets, their shields could deflect stellar radiation, and their coffee, well, their coffee was still terrible, but one couldn't have everything. Compared to human technology, they might as well have been gods visiting mortals, if gods were bureaucratically inclined and suffered from chronic superiority complexes. Yet something nagged at the edge of Vexthul's consciousness, a detail that his analytical mind couldn't quite categorize. The surveillance reports mentioned increased electromagnetic activity in several human population centers, concentrated around facilities that their primitive governments had classified beyond even their own intelligence agency's clearance level. The humans called it Project Titan, which sounded like exactly the sort of grandiose naming convention that species used when they wanted to feel important about their inevitable failures. Any intelligence on this Titan designation? Vexthul inquired, more out of professional thoroughness than genuine concern. His intelligence officer's response crackled with barely suppressed amusement. Our deep space monitoring stations have intercepted fragments of their communication. Apparently, they believe they can construct something called mechanical gods to defend their world. The energy requirements alone would drain their entire planetary power grid 17 times over, assuming they could even achieve stable fusion containment, which our models suggest they can. Vexthul's laughter resonated through the command center like wind chimes in a hurricane. Mechanical gods. These delightful creatures thought they could simply engineer their way out of a galactic conquest. It was like watching children build sandcastles to stop a tsunami, touching in its futility, amusing in its ambition. The bureaucratic machinery of galactic conquest ground forward with well-oiled efficiency. Forms were filed, conquest permits were stamped, and the appropriate notifications were sent to the Galactic Ethics Committee, which would file a strongly worded complaint approximately 6 months after the invasion concluded. Everything proceeded according to the established protocols that had served the hegemony so well across countless worlds. Commence standard orbital bombardment in 12 standard hours. Vexthul commanded, settling back into his command pod. And do try to preserve some of their cultural site. I understand they've created something called pizza, that our xenobiologists are eager to study. As the fleet moved into attack formation, gravitational drives humming with the casual power of controlled stellar collapse, none of the hegemony's finest noticed the subtle energy signatures building deep beneath Earth's surface. After all, why would gods concern themselves with the desperate scratching of ants in the dirt below? The countdown began, and Vexthul returned to his probability crystals, confident that in 12 hours, Earth would join the long list of worlds that had learned the futility of resisting galactic progress. How charmingly naive these humans would prove to be. If only he'd paid closer attention to those energy readings. The first bombardment struck Earth's outer atmosphere precisely on schedule, because if the Zephyrian hegemony excelled at anything besides condescension, it was punctuality. Plasma lances carved through the sky like angry gods drawing lines in blue canvas, while humans scurried about their planet doing what humans did best when faced with overwhelming odds. Panicking creatively and making increasingly desperate phone calls to people who couldn't help them anyway. Vexthul observed the light show with the detached interest of someone watching particularly expensive fireworks. The humans' orbital defense platforms lasted approximately 47 seconds longer than predicted, which was either a testament to their surprising ingenuity or a damning indictment of hegemony intelligence estimates. Probably both, knowing the galaxy's tendency toward ironic complication. "Sir," his tactical officer announced with the practiced boredom of someone describing a routine maintenance schedule, "their defensive grid has collapsed. Shall we proceed to ground assault protocol?" But before Vexthul could respond with the appropriate military jargon, something extraordinary happened. Something that would later be described in hegemony after-action reports as an unprecedented tactical development, and in Vexthul's personal logs as the moment reality decided to mock everything I thought I understood about primitive civilization. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, in facilities that human governments had spent decades denying existed, the Titan Protocol activated with the subtle fanfare of continental plates shifting. The first volunteer, a former military engineer whose name would never appear in any official records, felt her consciousness dissolve into streams of quantum information, every synapse mapped and translated into something far more durable than mere flesh and bone. The process, in which human scientists had romantically dubbed transcendence, and alien observers would later term mechanically assisted insanity, involved uploading human consciousness into bodies that violated several fundamental laws of physics and at least 3 treaties governing the construction of weapons of mass destruction. The humans, naturally, had never signed those treaties because they'd never been invited to the meetings where such civilized restraints were discussed. Vexthul's attention was first drawn to the anomaly by his sensor operator's increasingly frantic bleeping. "Commander, we're detecting massive energy signatures from multiple points across the planet's surface. The readings are, well, they're impossible." "Define impossible," Vexthul replied, though he suspected he wouldn't enjoy the answer. "The energy output from these sources exceeds our theoretical maximums for planetary-based generation by approximately 4,000%. Either the humans have discovered how to harness stellar cores as personal power sources, or our instruments have developed a sense of humor." Vexthul's 3 hearts performed an intricate dance of panic in his chest cavity. In his extensive career of galactic conquest, he'd learned that when sensor readings became impossible, reality was usually preparing to become deeply inconvenient. He'd also learned that species capable of making impossible things happen tended to have strong opinions about being conquered, opinions they expressed through increasingly violent demonstrations of their impossibility. The first Titan emerged from beneath the Mojave Desert, like a mechanical mountain deciding to stand up and stretch. Its humanoid form rose through layers of rock and sand, emergency systems kicking in as tons of earth cascaded from its shoulder. At 400 meters tall, it possessed the casual enormity of a skyscraper that had decided to take a walk, its optical sensors blazing with an intelligence that was unmistakably terrifyingly human. The consciousness inhabiting this mechanical colossus retained every memory, every quirk, every stubborn human trait that had once belonged to someone who'd paid taxes, complained about traffic, and had strong opinions about coffee preparation method. Now those same neural patterns controlled fusion reactors that could power small cities and weapons systems that treated the laws of physics as polite suggestions rather than absolute mandate. "Contact all ships," Vexthul commanded, his voice carrying only a slight tremor that he attributed to excitement rather than the growing certainty that his day was about to become significantly more complicated. "We need immediate tactical assessment of whatever just emerged from that desert." His communications officer's response arrived, wrapped in the sort of professional calm that preceded career-ending disasters. "Sir, we've lost contact with 3 reconnaissance drones. The entity appears to have acquired target locks on 17 of our vessels simultaneously." Vexthul's probability crystals clattered to the deck as his command pod shuddered. Through the view screen, he watched the impossible sight of a mechanical giant gesturing toward his fleet, with what appeared to be a distinctly human expression of annoyance. The being's movements carried the fluid grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime inhabiting organic flesh, now translated into the terrifying elegance of engineered perfection. Analysis suggests, his tactical computer announced with the cheerful precision of artificial intelligence that hadn't yet grasped the severity of the situation, that the entity possesses weapons capabilities equivalent to a Class 7 battlecruiser, defensive systems that register as incomprehensible, and what appears to be a distinctly unfriendly attitude toward uninvited guests. More energy signatures began blooming across Earth's surface like flowers in a garden tended by a particularly violent deity. Each new reading represented another impossible fusion of human consciousness and mechanical transcendence, another volunteer who'd chosen to become something that redefined the upper limits of what organic intelligence could achieve when properly motivated and significantly enlarged. The second Titan rose from beneath the Swiss Alps, its emergence triggering avalanches that redrew the local geography. The third surfaced in the Pacific Ocean, sending tsunamis racing toward distant shores, while its optical arrays focused on the orbital positions of Vexthul's increasingly nervous fleet. Each new awakening added another voice to what was becoming a distinctly hostile mechanical choir. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, his earlier amusement now replaced by the sort of professional concern reserved for situations that required immediate updates to one's personal will. "We're receiving a transmission from the surface. It appears to be diplomatic correspondent." The message, when it arrived, was delivered in 17 galactic languages simultaneously, suggesting that human intelligence capabilities had been somewhat underestimated in previous assessment. The voice that spoke carried the unmistakable accent of someone who'd grown up watching Saturday morning cartoons and complaining about government bureaucracy, now amplified through vocal systems that could shatter moon. "This is Earth Defense Command." The transmission began with the casual authority of someone describing weekend gardening plans. "And we'd like to have a word with whoever's in charge of this particular invasion attempt. Please prepare for immediate diplomatic negotiations, which will be conducted at coordinates we're about to provide. Oh, and do try to avoid sudden movements. Some of our newer residents are still adjusting to their enhanced capabilities and tend to overreact to perceived threat." Vexthul stared at his tactical display, watching as energy signatures that shouldn't exist tracked his fleet's movements with the patient attention of predators who'd suddenly discovered that dinner had delivered itself. The humans, it seemed, had spent their time preparing something rather more substantial than strongly worded diplomatic protests. The age of easy conquest, he realized with growing dread, had just come to an abrupt and decidedly mechanical end. The diplomatic meeting occurred in Earth's upper atmosphere, which was itself a statement of the new power dynamics at play. When one party could casually stroll through the vacuum of space while the other required life support systems and gravity generators, traditional concepts of home field advantage underwent rapid revision. Vexthul descended in his personal shuttle, accompanied by a security detail that had suddenly developed a collective case of what military psychologists termed performance anxiety in the face of impossible odds. The first Titan waited at the designated coordinates,
floating in space with the casual disregard for physics that humans apparently considered a reasonable substitute for proper engineering protocol. Up close, the mechanical colossus possessed a beauty that was both inspiring and deeply unsettling. Its form blended human proportions with technological perfection, creating something that looked like classical sculpture had been scaled up by someone with access to stellar forges and a complete disregard for material limitation. The being's optical sensors tracked the approaching shuttle with the patient attention of someone watching a particularly slow insect to navigate toward a conversation it wasn't prepared for. "Greetings," the Titan's voice resonated through space itself, transmitted via gravitational wave manipulation that shouldn't have been possible for a civilization that still used fossil fuels for transportation. "I trust your journey down here wasn't too uncomfortable. We've taken the liberty of adjusting local space-time to ensure stable atmospheric conditions for your visit." Vex Thul's shuttle instruments confirmed what his three hearts already suspected. The humans had somehow created a pocket of breathable atmosphere in the middle of space, held together by technology that his science officers would spend decades failing to comprehend. It was the sort of casual impossibility that civilizations developed when they stopped asking whether something could be done and started asking whether it would be sufficiently impressive. "I am Fleet Commander Vex Thul of the Zephyrian Hegemony," he announced through his shuttle's communication array, maintaining the sort of diplomatic composure that had served him well during the conquest of 17 previous worlds. "I represent the interests of the Galactic Confederation in these proceedings." "Fascinating," the Titan replied, its massive head tilting with an expression that managed to convey polite interest and barely restrained violence simultaneously. "And I represent the interests of approximately 8 billion humans who have some rather strong opinions about uninvited guests. Perhaps we should discuss the terms of your immediate departure." The conversation that followed would later be studied in military academies as a masterclass in how traditional power structures could be inverted by sufficient application of engineering prowess and human stubbornness. Vex Thul attempted to explain the legal frameworks that governed galactic conquest, citing precedents established over millennia of civilized warfare. The Titan listened with the patience of someone hearing an interesting but ultimately irrelevant historical lecture. "You see," Vex Thul concluded, "under Galactic Statute HFY 7b, primitive civilizations that lack faster-than-light capability are classified as pre-contact species, which places them under the protection protocols that allow for supervised integration into galactic society." "How thoughtful," the Titan responded, its voice carrying the sort of warmth typically reserved for discussing tax audits. "And under human statute, go bother someone else. Civilizations that show up uninvited and start shooting are classified as target practice. I believe our legal frameworks may be incompatible." During this exchange, Vex Thul became gradually aware that his fleet was no longer alone in Earth's orbital space. Additional Titans had emerged from the planet's surface, each one representing another impossible fusion of human consciousness and mechanical transcendence. They moved through space like dancers in a ballet choreographed by someone with a PhD in applied intimidation, their positions forming a sphere around his vessels that suggested careful tactical planning rather than random positioning. "How many of you are there?" Vex Thul inquired, though he suspected the answer would not improve his day significantly. "Currently, 12 active units, with another 43 in various stages of awakening. We've discovered that the transition from organic to mechanical consciousness goes much more smoothly when volunteers have strong motivation to protect their home world. Your invasion has provided excellent motivation." The tactical implications struck Vex Thul like a revelation delivered via high-velocity physics lesson. Each Titan possessed firepower equivalent to his most advanced warships, defensive capabilities that registered as theoretical impossibilities, and the unpredictable creativity that came from human consciousness, unshackled from biological limitation. 55 such beings would represent a fleet capable of challenging the entire hegemony. Perhaps, Vex Thul suggested with the careful diplomacy of someone whose afternoon had taken several unexpected turns, we could discuss alternative arrangements. The hegemony is always interested in establishing peaceful trade relationships with newly contacted civilizations. Trade? The Titan's optical sensors blazed with what appeared to be amusement. "How delightful. We'd be happy to trade your immediate departure for our continued restraint in demonstrating why humans make terrible enemies when properly motivated. As if summoned by some invisible signal, the other Titans began moving into attack formations that transformed the space around Earth into a three-dimensional chessboard, where every piece was a mechanical god with anger management issue. Their movements possessed the fluid coordination of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of violence, now amplified through technology that treated the speed of light as a polite suggestion rather than absolute limit. Vexthul's tactical computers began generating probability assessments that read like suicide notes written by mathematicians. His fleet, which had conquered 17 worlds through superior technology and overwhelming firepower, now found itself surrounded by beings that redefined what constituted overwhelming firepower. The humans had somehow managed to bootstrap themselves from primitive spaceflight to mechanically ascended godhood in the space of a few decades, skipping several thousand years of conventional technological development through sheer bloody-minded determination. Commander, his tactical officer's voice carried the professional calm of someone who'd accepted that his career was about to take a dramatic turn toward the historically significant. We're detecting weapons locks from all surrounding units. Their targeting systems appear to be comprehensive. The demonstration that followed was brief, surgical, and absolutely terrifying in its implication. One of the Titans casually reached toward a nearby asteroid, its manipulator fields reducing several million tons of rock and metal to component atoms in a display of casual omnipotence that made Vexthul's most advanced weapons look like thrown pebbles by comparison. We've taken the liberty of calculating optimal trajectories for your return journey, the lead Titan announced helpfully. Our analysis suggests that immediate departure would be in everyone's best interests, particularly yours. Vexthul found himself in the uniquely uncomfortable position of being an apex predator who'd suddenly discovered that his intended prey had evolved into something considerably more dangerous than originally advertised. The humans, it seemed, had spent their brief existence preparing for exactly this moment, developing contingencies that transformed them from amusing primitives into the sort of threat that required immediate updates to Galactic Threat Assessment Protocol. We withdraw, he announced, the words carrying the bitter taste of decisions that would require extensive explanation to his superiors. But this matter is far from concluded. Oh, we're counting on it, the Titan replied, its massive form already turning back toward Earth. We'll be here whenever you'd like to continue this conversation. We're not going anywhere, and we've discovered that we rather enjoy meeting new neighbors. As his fleet began its retreat, Vexthul realized that the galaxy had just acquired its newest apex predator, and it wore a distinctly human face. The emergency session of the Galactic Confederation convened with all the pomp and ceremony typically reserved for declaring wars against cosmic entities, or deciding which species would be responsible for bringing refreshments to the annual Peace Summit. Representatives from 47 civilizations gathered in their orbiting parliament, a magnificent structure that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the negotiation of treaties that reshaped star systems, and countless debates about whether artificial intelligence deserved voting rights. Today, however, they faced a crisis that threatened to redefine everything they thought they understood about galactic power dynamics. The humans had become interesting. Vexthul stood before the assembly, his formal report clutched in tentacles that trembled only slightly with what he insisted was residual hyperspace sickness rather than existential dread. His account of the failed Earth conquest had circulated through diplomatic channels with the speed typically reserved for gossip about which ambassador was embezzling cultural exchange funds, generating responses that ranged from incredulous laughter to demands for immediate psychological evaluation. Honored delegates, Vexthul began, his voice carrying the professional composure of someone who'd practiced this speech in mirrors while contemplating career changes into less stressful fields like stellar cartography or quantum philosophy. I present to you the official after-action report regarding our recent diplomatic contact with the previously designated harmless civilization of the Quellian ambassador, whose species had perfected the art of condescending through bioluminescent display patterns, pulsed with colors that roughly translated to "You've got to be kidding." The representative from the hegemony's oldest rival, the crystalline collective, vibrated at frequencies that suggested either extreme amusement or preparation for immediate military mobilization. The intelligence gathered during our encounter, Bexthul continued, requires immediate revision of human threat assessment, from negligible entertainment value to potential galactic hegemon with anger management issues. The technological capabilities they demonstrated suggest a species that has somehow managed to achieve post-singularity transcendence, while simultaneously maintaining the emotional maturity of adolescence with access to stellar engineering equipment. The holographic display behind him activated, showing sensor recordings of the Titans that still made his tactical computers crash when forced to process the implication. 47 distinct species, representing millions of years of combined evolutionary development, stared at images of mechanical gods gesturing rudely at invasion fleets, while casually manipulating the fundamental forces of reality. These beings, Bexthul explained, gesturing toward recordings that violated several laws of physics, and at least one treaty governing the construction of weapons that could accidentally destroy galaxies, appear to retain full human personality structures, while inhabiting bodies that register as Class X. They demonstrate capabilities that our theoretical physicists classify as impossible, and our military strategists describe using language unsuitable for formal diplomatic proceeding. The Altarian delegate, whose species prided itself on logical analysis, untainted by emotional bias, raised a crystalline appendage with movements that suggested recent recalibration of previously held assumptions. Clarification requested. Are you suggesting that this previously classified primitive species has achieved mechanical transcendence, while maintaining organic psychological patterns? Indeed, Bexthul replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd watched his entire worldview undergo rapid and involuntary restructuring. They've essentially become immortal, omnipotent, and deeply committed to protecting their homeworld from uninvited guests. The combination appears to be both unprecedented and profoundly inconvenient for traditional conquest methodologies. The parliamentary chamber erupted into the sort of chaos typically reserved for announcements that the galactic coffee supply had been contaminated, or that someone had accidentally declared war on a peaceful trading consortium. Representatives from civilizations that had spent millennia refining the art of galactic domination suddenly found themselves recalculating threat assessments and updating emergency protocols designed for encounters with species that shouldn't exist. Ambassador Thexarana of the Voidwalkers, whose people had perfected intimidation through strategic use of existential dread, spoke with the careful precision of someone whose entire cultural identity had just been challenged by mechanical beings who treated physics as a collaborative, rather than authoritative discipline. What are their intentions regarding galactic expansion? Have they issued demands for territorial concessions or tribute arrangements? That's perhaps the most disturbing aspect of our encounter, Bexthul admitted, his report rustling with the sound of documents that would soon be classified at levels requiring psychological preparation for authorized readers. They appear to have no interest in conquest expansion or traditional expressions of newly acquired power. They simply want to be left alone to continue their fascinating experiments in transcendental engineering and whatever they call weekend barbecue protocols. The silence that followed this revelation carried the weight of 47 civilizations, simultaneously reconsidering their basic assumptions about how advanced species should behave when granted godlike capabilities. In the established galactic order, transcendent beings either became cosmic philosophers dispensing wisdom to lesser mortals, or universe-conquering tyrants with delusions of omnipotence. They didn't become neighborhood watch committees with stellar-level firepower.
Recommendation analysis suggests the parliamentary AI announced with the cheerful certainty of artificial intelligence that hadn't yet grasped the implications of its own calculations, that formal diplomatic recognition of human sovereignty would optimize long-term galactic stability indices while minimizing probability of apocalyptic conflict scenarios. The vote that followed was swift, unanimous, and accompanied by the sort of nervous laughter that preceded major historical turning points. Earth was formally recognized as a sovereign power, granted full diplomatic status, and immediately placed on the do not disturb unless absolutely necessary list that typically included cosmic entities, sentient black holes, and civilizations that had weaponized mathematics. Within standard galactic weeks, trade delegations began arriving at Earth's orbital boundaries with offerings of advanced technology, cultural exchange programs, and carefully worded apologies for any previous inconvenience caused by invasion fleets. The humans, true to their paradoxical nature, responded by establishing the galaxy's first interspecies pizza delivery service and hosting diplomatic receptions that featured something called karaoke that traumatized visiting ambassadors in entirely new ways. The irony was not lost on anyone with sufficient intelligence to appreciate cosmic humor. The species that had been dismissed as harmless pets had become the galactic community's newest superpower through the simple expedient of refusing to accept limitations imposed by conventional reality. They'd achieved transcendence not through millennia of philosophical evolution or technological gradualness, but through the characteristically human approach of deciding that existing constraints were merely suggestions awaiting creative reinterpretation. Vex, now serving as the hegemony's permanent ambassador to Earth, had established his embassy in what the humans called downtown Denver, where he spent his days filing reports that read like science fiction novels, and his evenings learning to appreciate something called craft beer, that the locals insisted was essential for proper diplomatic relations. The galaxy had discovered, much to its collective surprise, that the most dangerous species in known space was also the most interested in teaching others how to properly grill vegetables and engage in ritualized competition involving spherical objects and incomprehensible scoring systems. They'd become gods essentially, but gods who maintained active social media accounts and complained about traffic congestion in their transcendent mechanical bodies. And perhaps most terrifying of all, they seemed genuinely happy to meet their neighbors, as long as those neighbors remembered to wipe their feet before visiting and didn't mind the occasional demonstration of technologies that redefined what constituted polite conversation between civilizations. The age of easy conquest had indeed ended, replaced by something far more complex and infinitely more interesting. The age of humans who'd figured out how to become impossible while remaining stubbornly, charmingly, and apocalyptically themselves.